Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Cincinnati Reds. And our Reds, who snuck into the playoffs as a wild card this past season, are now at the start of free agency for the 2024 to 25 offseason. We've already made a number of moves in the early weeks of the offseason, dealt with a lot of arbitration eligible players. And we actually made one potentially significant trade. We traded away first baseman Ryan Mountcastle, who was due to be making around $4 million in arbitration. And we felt like, as some of you have noted in past episodes, we kind of had a glut of corner infielders. Didn't necessarily want to be paying him $4 million, especially with Ellie De La Cruz, one of the top young prospects in the game, potentially ready to take over at first base. So we dealt Mr. Mountcastle away, coincidentally, for Kyle Wright of the Atlanta Braves, who's making a bit more than that in arbitration after we settled with him. But he's the pitcher who pitched the Braves to the deciding Game 3 victory over us in the playoffs this year. And taking a look at our potential pitching staff right now, it looks pretty solid at this point, with Cy Young runner-up Nick Lodolo, last year's big free agent acquisition Aaron Nola, Huascar Ynoa, who we picked up in a trade from the Braves almost 2 years ago, missed all of last year but had a nice year this year, the aforementioned Kyle Wright, and then Tyler Wells, who had a nice year for us. So I like the way the rotation is looking, particularly if Nola comes back from his injury successfully. He is healthy now, we think. Waiting to see what an updated scouting report on him looks like. But before we dig too deeply into this episode and get free agency going, need to pivot briefly to something more personal and not baseball related. Those of you who have been watching the OOTP baseball series know that I am a fan of the New York Yankees. But the other teams I happen to root for in the real world indicate that I am by no means a front runner with all of my teams. Because the other teams I root for are the New York Islanders in hockey, the New York Knicks in basketball, and the Islanders and Knicks both in the playoffs right now. Islanders not doing so well against Carolina, but the Knicks are doing quite well thus far against Cleveland. But the other team I root for is the New York Jets. And a few hours ago, the New York Jets made a trade for four-time MVP and one-time Super Bowl champion, Mr. Aaron Rodgers. Quite honestly, I think the Jets gave up a little bit too much to pick up Rodgers. I think that conditional second-round pick next year that can become a first-rounder is certainly favorable towards the Packers without there being any playoff requirements for it to become a first-rounder. But that said, I am not quite old enough to have lived through the Jets' one Super Bowl appearance and one Super Bowl victory with Joe Namath. But I have seen the team go to the AFC Championship game 4 times in my life. 1982 with the New York Sack Exchange. 1998 with Bill Parcells, Vinny Testaverde, Keyshawn Johnson, Wayne Chrebet, Curtis Martin. And then 2009 and 2010 with the Rex Ryan defense. Hall of Famer Darrelle Revis and Revis Island, and Mark Sanchez at quarterback. And none of those teams were able to get into the Super Bowl. And I don't know if the Jets with Aaron Rodgers will get to the Super Bowl, but with the defense that the Jets had last season and the youth that the Jets have on their roster, while you can certainly argue that Kansas City, Buffalo, and the Cincinnati Bengals all have better quarterbacks than the Jets do with Aaron Rodgers, given that he's 39, closing in on 40 years old, and coming off of a bit of an off season. You can also certainly argue, and I think argue quite accurately, that the Jets have a better defense than any of those three teams. So I'm not here claiming that the Jets are going to win the Super Bowl this upcoming season, but I will say that I think the Jets have the best chance that they've ever had of getting to a Super Bowl during my lifetime, which is a big victory. So with that, Jets, 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 Jets. We're going to see what this season looks like in the fall. But enough of my rant. Back to our Cincinnati Reds. And we've gotten a few good suggestions for things to dig into as we begin this free agency period. And when we look at our lineup, this first piece of advice is going to be very important. Jared Kelenic, I believe, finished 4th in the MVP voting this year. Kelenic had a really nice year for us, 38 homers and 120 ribbies. But when you look at the rest of the offense, he had almost twice as many home runs as anyone else on our team. And he also had almost twice as many ribbies as anyone else on our team. So the offense is very dependent on his production. And Rec92 brought up the good point that maybe we should go after one of these good Japanese imports who are big bats. Left fielder Takeji Suga certainly looks like he could be a monster as far as home run hitting, draw a ton of walks, particularly playing in Great American Ballpark. We do have low scouting accuracy on him. It's going to take 3 weeks for us to really know who he is, and he's looking for over $30 million a year. And the other big free agent is Yashiya Uehara. Potentially an even better home run bat, not looking for quite as much money, but again, it's going to be 3 weeks until we get a scouting report on him. So I do agree with Rec92 that we probably need to improve our offense, but given that right now we've got Kelenic in left field, and then our potential corner outfielders for next season are Will Benson, Will Abreu, and then a very big-time prospect in Austin Hendrick, who just hit 58 homers last year between AA and AAA. I don't feel like we need a corner outfielder, and both of those Japanese players are corner outfielders who really can't play center field. Both have below average range. One of them is 40 and one of them is 45. Obviously, our scouting reports are not particularly accurate right now, but I don't think they're magically going to turn into Gary Pettis or Devon White or Ken Griffey Jr. or Jim Edmonds out in center field. So we probably will not be spending the big bucks on either of those two players, although it was an interesting idea. And if you see our total money available, and you remember last episode, you'll see that a lot of our money has disappeared, and that's because we have made an offer to a player. There are 3 big pitchers available. Zach Wheeler, who was on our team this year, Corbin Burns, who we thought about trading for as we approached the trade deadline, and Luis Severino. Those are the 3 top arms, despite the fact that I do like what our starting rotation is starting to become. I think we could certainly still upgrade from Wells in that number 5 spot, and certainly with Nola having missed all of last year, I don't know that we can count on him to pitch over 30 starts for us next year. So I feel like we want to add another frontline starter. And you can see Wheeler looking for about $27 million a year over 5 years. Burns looking for about $27 million a year over 8 years. Severino looking for about $25 million a year over 7 years. All the players looking for pretty big money. Wheeler is 34 years old. What I like about him is that he's got the best movement of those three pitchers, still throws pretty hard, has the high work ethic. He did have some injury issues with us this year, just went 8-8 after we traded for him, but still at a 3.31 ERA, put up a 2.3 WAR. Concern with him is that he's going to be 35 years old next season, and he's looking for a deal that takes him well into his late 30s. Luis Severino, pretty well-balanced pitcher and a pretty productive pitcher for the Yankees over the past 3 seasons. Don't love his fragility. Worry that he's going to end up getting hurt. But everything else about him screams a very solid number 2 or number 3 starter on a good team. And then there's Corbin Burns, the youngest of these 3 players, by almost a year compared to Severino. Also has high work ethic. The concern with him, and he's coming off of, you can see, leading the league in innings pitched 2 consecutive years, strikeouts 2 consecutive years, wins this past season. But he led the league in home runs allowed in 2023 with Milwaukee. And I do have a concern that that average movement in Great American Ballpark could lead to him giving up a lot of home runs. That said, Corbin Burns, as you can see if you've been looking closely at the screen, is the guy that we are interested in. He's looking for $27 million over 8 years, and we have made him an offer. 6 years at $25 million a year. So fewer years than he was looking for, less money per year than he was looking for, and he wanted a bunch of player options. We've taken those player options out and turned them into a team option for the 6th year of the contract. I agree he's not necessarily a perfect fit for our ballpark, given that his movement is lower than that of Sevy or Wheels. But I think he's still the best overall pitcher. He's also the youngest. And he's also led the league in innings pitched 2 straight years. He's got normal injury proneness. Hopefully he proves to be a workhorse that goes out there and pitches 30-plus starts a year for the next 5 years if he's a member of our team. So that may be a controversial move by me to go with Burns over Sevy or Wheeler, to go with the pitcher, the starting pitcher, over the potential big bat in the outfield. I did mention that center field is an area that I would like to upgrade. We did make a very modest offer to another Japanese import, Kei Kodama. Durable, a lot of speed, has the range to play center field. I don't love his error or his arm ratings. I'm viewing him as more of a potential 5th outfielder. Don't know what the bat really is. You know, the contact, the eye, and the avoid Ks are all potentially average to below average. Our scouting accuracy on him is only average. I do like the potentially excellent gap power with a lot of speed. But right now, he's willing to sign a minor league contract as long as if he makes the major league team, he's going to make a little over $1 million next year. So I think if we can bring him into camp, it gives us an interesting option to think about in terms of building our 26-man roster for next year, with Kodama as potentially a 4th or 5th outfielder, and someone who could potentially at least play a respectable center field in terms of his range, although there will be situations where he's tracking down a ball and then it bounces out of his glove with that poor error rating, which if I played the games out one by one would probably be a lot more annoying to me than the way I normally play, where I sim through weeks at a time very quickly. And the last thing to check in, based on your suggestions, in this case suggestions from Randy Pepler and 3/4 Badger, is what could we get for Aaron Nola in a trade? If you don't like me potentially spending about as much money this offseason on Corbin Burns as we spent last offseason on Aaron Nola, is it more palatable if we get Nola off of the team, coming off of a major injury that caused him to miss the entire season for us in the first year of a potential 7-year contract? So Randy and the Badger, sounds like it could have been a sitcom in the 80s, Randy and the Badger, both suggested that we shop Aaron Nola. And honestly, this is something that had kind of crossed my mind in the last episode, but I was kind of thinking to myself, I'm not going to get anything for him. I'm going to have to take a horrible contract on in return to make it work. So I just wasn't going to do it. But fortunately, Randy Pepler and 3/4 Badger brought it up, and I thought to myself when they made that point, yeah, it does make sense to at least look and see what we can potentially get for Nola. And I have not done this yet. My gut is I'm not going to be impressed with what we get for an offer, given that Nola is set to make average of a little more than $20 million a year for the next 5 years before that player option in the final season, the 7th year of his contract, kicks in. So I tend to think I'm not going to be impressed with the offers that we get for him. But I won't know the answer to that until I click this button. Yes, with us retaining none of his contract, we literally get no offers. So that kind of was what I feared, but it's still good for me to check on it. If we keep 50% of his contract, and I cannot see keeping 50% of his contract being palatable as the general manager of the Cincinnati Reds, I think in that situation we would rather just keep the contract and hope. But if we keep 50% of his contract, there is still nobody interested in Aaron Nola. Now, some of it could be that teams just don't have a lot of money if the finances of the game aren't in a good spot right now, but I would think with free agency just starting, finances are going to be as good as possible. If we retain 80% of his contract, no team offers a single player in return. Okay. So we know that Aaron Nola is going to be with us next year. So now the question is, how will Corbin Burns react to the offer that I've made to him? I do think if we add Corbin Burns into this rotation, that moves Tyler Wells into the bullpen. It probably means that the likes of Clark Schmidt or Will Warren or maybe even Ian Anderson aren't even on our 26-man roster next year. So it definitely improves what was already a pretty good pitching staff. But if Nola comes back healthy, that should at least replace what Wheeler did. And then if we're adding Corbin Burns on top of a Tyler Wells, that's a pretty big upgrade. And we've still got a proven starter at this point like Tyler Wells to potentially help us when we do have some injuries, in addition to a Schmidt or a Warren or an Anderson or even a Reivar San Martin is a potential 5th or 4th starter for us if we have a bunch of injuries. So I really like what potentially bringing Burns on board would do for this rotation. But I understand that some of you may think I'm being a bit risky bringing on another pitcher on the wrong side of 30 to a long and expensive contract with a team that is only 21st in the majors in terms of his budget. And those are all fair criticisms, but the goal is to try to win it all, and I'm not going to be playing as the Reds for a decade, given that this is still a shorter term playthrough before I begin my long-term OOTP playthrough. And I think Corbin Burns and potentially bringing him on board will give us the best chance of turning a team that was a playoff team this year into a team that can hopefully contend for a World Series championship at some point over the next few seasons. So the offer to Corbin Burns is out there. The offer to Kei Kodama is out there. And then we've still got a little bit of money to also potentially play with going forward. But clearly figuring out what's going to go on with Corbin Burns is the big thing that we need to think about right now. And if that deal doesn't work, then the hope is clearly that maybe a Severino or a Wheeler is still available. Or maybe we pivot to a Suga or a Uehara if we get a better scouting report on those guys and still think that they're potential big-time players. So it's going to be an interesting offseason for these Reds. Let's get it going. And one day into the offseason, and we've heard nothing from Corbin Burns. Should we be panicked? Perhaps not. But with the calendar flipping to December, that does give us an opportunity to revisit our international amateur free agents. We've obviously run training camps in both October and November at this point, getting ready to run a training camp here in December now. The only change that we've made, we dropped one of the 4 pitchers that we had scouted each of the first 2 sessions, and we're replacing them with center fielder Lupe Reina. Durable player, looks like he could have an interesting bat. An okay glove in the outfield, pretty good speed. Don't love the low intelligence, but still an interesting prospect where league interest also happens to be pretty low right now. The pitching prospect that we dropped off the list, I don't think he's ever going to be a starter. His third pitch is a changeup, and it was a 20 out of, I think, 50 right now. Obviously, if that pitch doesn't develop and he's a 2-pitch guy, he's at best a reliever. So I'm going to shoot a little higher in terms of the pitchers that I'm going to continue scouting with Adame, Castro, and Rosso. So we're going to go ahead and run our practice with these 10 players, see if we can improve some of these relationships, and even more importantly, improve some of our scouting accuracy as we get about a month and a half away from the beginning of the signing period for international amateur free agents. And since I didn't have my players locked, they all disappeared, but here's the 10 guys that we brought through the camp. You can see the relationships, very strong in a few cases now. Reina, we still don't know a ton about. Low scouting accuracy, still a weak relationship given that we've only brought him through our camp once. We'll have to decide whether we want to bring him through in January for one final time. But we're up to average and high scouting accuracy on the other 9 players who have been through 3 practices and private training sessions with us at this point. So we're at least beginning to have a better understanding of the universe of players that's out there. And obviously about a month and a half from now, we're going to have to figure out which players on this list or that we haven't scouted as actively that we'd like to make offers to. But we've got some time to think about that. In the meantime, we wait on Corbin Burns. We've got about 2 weeks till the winter meetings start, about 3 weeks to the Rule 5 draft. Will we have Burns locked up before then? Will he go somewhere else? Will he come back to us looking for more money? There's lots of ways this can go. And we have heard back from Mr. Burns, Montgomery Burns, and he says we're out in front right now. It's definitely not going to be cheap. And like I said, I know it's not perfect with the poor movement, or not poor movement, but with the average movement in a ballpark that has a tendency to give up a fair amount of home runs. But you look back to 2023, he led the league in home runs allowed that year. And he still led the league in innings pitched, led the league in strikeouts, 14-11 record, into 4.1 WAR with a 267 SIERA despite all of those home runs. Could it be a little worse in Great American Ballpark? Absolutely. But I think he was the most talented of the three pitchers, the three big pitchers that were on the market. Wheeler's 4.5 years older. Severino is fragile and almost a year older. I think I'm willing to go with the guy who may give up a few more home runs, that I think is all in the best pitcher of the three. And Sunday, December 8th is a big day for the Cincinnati Reds. We have lost Zach Wheeler officially, but we have signed Corbin Burnes officially. So the fans not upset that Wheeler is gone. Wheeler went to the Kansas City Royals, while the Kansas City Royals and the Cincinnati Reds signing two of the three big pitchers on the market. Average of close to $20 million a year for 4 seasons for Wheeler. And we will get a supplemental first-round pick for the signing of Wheeler. Unfortunately, we will have to give up a third-round pick for the fact that we lost Corbin Burnes, but net, that's still positive for us. Fans very excited, and Corbin Burnes is on board with the Reds. As I mentioned, average of $25 million a year over 6 years for the 30-year-old. Contract a bit front-loaded, as you can see, and then the team option in his age 35 season at $20 million either will be a nice exit for us or potentially a real good value for him in that 6th season for us. But we are now officially playing to win in 2025. Not that there was ever any doubt, but with Corbin Burnes now on board, the pitching rotation is potentially looking pretty imposing with Burnes, Lodolo, Nola, Inoa, and Kyle Wright. Certainly no guarantees with what's going to happen this upcoming year, but absolutely think that we've got a big-time rotation if everyone stays healthy. I mean, Lodolo's a guy I've been concerned about. You can see his movement is definitely below average compared to where Burnes is. And Lodolo's still been pretty effective pitching half of his games in Cincinnati the last couple years. Did give up 25 dingers this year, but only 9 the year before. And as I mentioned, Lodolo was the runner-up in the Cy Young Award voting this year. So he's proving that you can be a successful pitcher in Cincinnati, even if you don't have great movement on your pitches. And hopefully we'll get that out of Burnes. But clearly our big move for this offseason is done. Net, we got a nice bump in fan interest. Only have a little over $5 million to play with at this point. So not going to be making any other big moves, but I like the pitching staff. So unfortunately, we're still a couple of weeks away from the scouting reports on Kodama, who we made the offer to, Suga and Uehara, as well as the reliever Dae-Sung Kim. He's probably going to be making too much money for us. So with the signing of Burnes, that likely takes him off of the radar. Clearly, Suga and Uehara are off the radar with the fact that there's no way for us to move Aaron Nola. So we're going to be focused on the pitching, and with a little over a month until we get to international amateur free agency with the fact that we're not all that concerned about the scouting reports of any free agents anymore. We'll request one final round of scouting reports on all of the international amateur free agents. These generally take a long time to acquire. You can see you can't see, but I have run through scouting reports for all of these players at least twice at this point, and you can see we still have a low scouting accuracy on the vast majority of them. And they also take a long time to get. Some of these reports are going to be 2 to 3, even 3 to 4 weeks, close to a month with a few of these players. But with it being only December 8th and international free agent signing beginning on the 15th, we'll at least get one more scouting report on all of these prospects before we need to start making decisions. And while we're still waiting to hear what happens with Kodama, I think I am going to make an offer to Adam Duvall. I don't think, similarly, that he is a starting center fielder defensively. He certainly is not a good starting defensive center fielder. Could he back up TJ Friedl at the position for us in a pinch? He could. I like the home run power. I like the fact that he's not looking for a ton of money. We could use a little more offense, and quite honestly, we could kind of use a right-handed bat, which is a little surprising for most teams, but we're pretty lefty-heavy. You can see the outfield is all left-handed batters, and then we've got a number of switch hitters in the infield to supplement the right-handed batters you're typically going to see at most infield positions, with the exception of first base. And there's where we've got the youngster Ellie De La Cruz. But there's no guarantees that Juan Yepez, who we picked up in a trade with St. Louis, is going to be making the 26-man roster. So I think even if we did sign Kodama, we'd also potentially have room on the roster for Duvall. So we're going to at least get an offer out to him. And he's actually looking for the same thing, a minor league contract that becomes a major league contract if he makes the team. So we'll definitely offer him that. We'd like to pay him a little bit less. He's willing to think about it. But if we could potentially have both Adam Duvall and Kodama in camp on minor league contracts that only become a major league contract if we want to put them on the 26-man roster, I think that would give us a lot of optionality as we get ready to head north from spring training, and potentially give us another useful bat for our lineup. All right, we're getting near the end of the winter meetings, and we're approaching the Rule 5 draft. Right now, both Duvall and Kodama favor the offers that we put out to them. So on top of on top of bringing on Corbin Burns, potentially bringing on those two guys, would make it a pretty interesting offseason for the Reds. We've still got a tiny bit of money to potentially spend. Obviously, if we don't spend that, could certainly put it to get our scouting and or player development back closer to where they were a year ago. Not that we've completely gutted those, but we wanted the flexibility to be active in free agency. And we certainly have been, bringing Corbin Burns on board. And we've made it to the Rule 5 draft. Certainly, if we could find a decent backup catcher, if we could find a guy who could play center field, if we could find a upgrade for our bullpen, those are three kind of obvious areas that we might be able to find something in the Rule 5 that could help us. And obviously, if there's just a really good young prospect, those of you who have watched me play previous series and even this series know I'm always willing to save that 25th or 26th spot on the roster for a pretty good player that other organizations just decide not to protect, even if they're not quite ready for the major leagues. So hopefully there'll be someone for us to pick up in the draft. we'll get it started. Just in terms of potential among the batters, Errol Vera, shortstop from Venezuela, stands out. Oof. He's a really interesting looking prospect. 22-year-old, only played in Double-A last year. Hit 253 with 19 homers in Double-A. I don't know the Rocket City Trash Pandas. I'm not sure. It looks like they're affiliated with the A's, or the Angels. Not a great defensive player, but good work ethic, good intelligence, and a bat that for a middle infielder certainly looks interesting. He's going to be real tempting if he's around. It wouldn't be easy for us to keep him on the 26-man roster just because we're so deep in the infield right now, but he would be tempting. And it looks like he's still there. What does our scouting director recommend? Cody Morris, a reliever. And Cody Morris is probably a reliever who could help us also. Spent time the last few years on the good old Columbus Shuttle, although the Columbus Shuttle now goes to Cleveland rather than the Bronx. But had one really nice year in the majors in 2022 with a 2.28 ERA. 2023, he was a disaster at the major league level. And then he played 8 games in AAA this past season where he pitched well. I'm guessing he must have been injured. Yeah, radial nerve decompression surgery that kept him out 4 to 5 months. So coming off of an injury, but certainly a interesting prospect for the bullpen. So there's some interesting guys out there. I'm going to spend a little more time digging through the options and let you know what I decide. And I'm actually going to follow our scouts' advice. There are some players that I'd love to pick in the second, maybe even the third round if they continue to fall to us. But our bullpen was pretty bad last year. And I think there's definitely an argument that Cody Morris could absolutely make our bullpen better. No guarantees that he makes the squad, but I'm willing to bring him into camp to keep that option open for a 28-year-old who has mostly been a starting pitcher in the major league level, or at the major league level. And I think that potentially could be more effective as a reliever. Obviously, our scouting accuracy on him is not great. OSA a little less positive on him than we are, but we can fix that scouting report over the next few months. But we are going to bring Cody Morris on board here in the first round. Potential guy who I think could help our bullpen next year. Ooh, and actually he's a pretty popular player apparently. I don't know why a guy from Laurel, Maryland, who at the major league level has a 6.17 ERA over 74 and a third innings. Don't know why he's popular in Cincinnati, but we'll take the little bump in fan interest from bringing him on board. And we'll continue with the Rule 5. And here in the second round, scouting director does not recommend we do anything. I'm still tempted by Errol Vera, though, still being out there. Like I said, I don't know that he's going to make our 26-man roster. But this is a 22-year-old who could have a plus bat, could be turned into someone who's a versatile, if not outstanding, defensive infielder. He's got the high work ethic and intelligence that hopefully he'll reach his potential. Certainly didn't have a monster year in Double-A, 253 average, but the 19 homers is decent. We're willing to at least bring him into camp, so we're going to pick Vera here in the second round. And in the third round, we're going to make another selection. Left fielder Jojo Blackman, not even 22 years old, hasn't been above A ball, and he only hit 237 in A ball last year. Certainly doesn't look like he's ready for the majors. So I think it's a real long shot that he makes the team as our fifth outfielder. But depending on what happens with the outfielders that we've made offers to, I don't mind having him in camp. He's got the range to at least play a competent backup center field for us. He's got a really good personality. I think he's too raw to actually make the team. But we're going to still bring him on board because if for whatever reason things don't work out with Duvall and Kodama, it does give us at least one more option to potentially be a fifth outfielder for us who could play center field for us in a pinch. And with those 3 Rule 5 picks, we're up to 38 men on the 40-man roster. So we've made some free agent acquisitions, most notably Corbin Burns. Actually, that's the only free agent acquisition we've made at this point, but we've got a couple other free agent offers out there. So want to at least retain potential spot on the 40-man roster for those other outfielders. And we had to move up some younger guys like Braylon Minier, certainly not ready yet, but we didn't want to risk losing him, so he's somebody that we put onto the 40-man to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. Number 20 prospect in baseball, hit 250 in high A ball for us last year. Certainly looks like he's got the potential to be a useful offensive player, so we didn't want to lose him. But we are getting close to having 40 men on our 40-man roster, so I'm guessing the second half of the offseason is going to be much less eventful than this first half has been. And this was kind of a weird Rule 5 draft. We were the only team that picked anybody, and we picked 3 players. I feel like Morris or Vera, I feel pretty confident one of those guys is going to be on our roster. Do all 3 of these guys make our 26-man roster? Almost certainly not. I'd probably put the over-under at 1.5, and I'd probably take the under. I think only one of them will end up making the roster, but I do think that either Morris or Vera, or maybe in a real weird situation, Blackman, end up being on the 26-man roster when we break spring training and head north in 2025. And probably not the worst thing that we brought on the young outfielder in the Rule 5 draft, because Kei Kodama has come back to us and says that San Francisco has made a better offer to him. I don't know whether he's looking for a guaranteed major league contract at this point. No, he says he's only looking for $1.1 million with a minor league deal. I believe our offer to him was $1.05 million, so I'll meet that demand. Although he says maybe that's not going to get the deal done. Yeah, that explains it a little more. All right, well, what if we give you a little more money? I'm still not willing to think about it. So I don't know that we're going to get him. I don't know that I want to offer him a guaranteed major league contract. I like him, but that error rating does concern me a bit. I think I appreciated him when I had the optionality to put him in the minors. I don't love guaranteeing him a major league spot. I like the speed, I like the durability, I like the gap power and the home run power. Everything else is average or worse at best, and that outfield error rating bothers me a bit. So I am not going to chase him right now, given that we are still in the mix for Duvall. And we've made it to the month of January, still waiting to hear back from Duvall. Kodama still hasn't signed anywhere else either, although he claims to want more money. We're a little over a week away from international amateur free agency, so still a lot of decisions for these Reds to make as the season approaches. My hope is that with Burns on board, that maybe when we get to the preseason, which is going to be in a little over 3 weeks, that maybe we'll get another little bump to our budget and be able to have a little more flexibility to add another free agent or two into the mix, or perhaps at least increase our scouting and player development a bit. But we'll find out what happens with that budget in our next episode. Before that even happens, hopefully we will have some resolution around Duval and Kodama. And then obviously we are going to have some big decisions around international amateur free agency in a little bit over a week. We've got these 4 guys in camp. Might as well run the last practice. Hopefully get to high or very high scouting accuracy on all of these prospects and continue improving these relationships before we approach the signing period. And yeah, now we've got strong to very strong relationships with everyone except Rania, who's the guy that we added in midway through. Got high and very high scouting accuracy. You can see there's a lot of interest in a lot of these players. So we're going to have some interesting decisions to make in international amateur free agency. Don't know that we have decisions, but we've got some interesting information coming our way with Duval and Kodama, hopefully in our next episode. And then hopefully we'll find out also what our budget is going to look like next year. And then hopefully get through spring training healthy. Would be nice to not lose an ace again in spring training, as we did with Aaron Nola last year. And if we can go with Burns, Lodolo, and Nola healthy, 30-plus starts from each of those 3 players, feel like this team could be very competitive in 2025. And we'll find out how spring training goes and how the rest of the off-season goes in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.